This is Granules of Grief with Refiloe, a podcast breaking down into digestible pieces the big lump that is grief. For those still struggling with its enormity, those unfamiliar, and even those who found a version of living that is somewhat closer to the aliveness they had before the loss. Thank you for being here. Speaking today with Rethabile Masilo. I have known Rethabile for over a decade. This is our first time talking.
Directly, yes.
Talking directly, yes. We've mostly, I think, collaborated over email and other platforms, but never really spoke to each other. So I'm very excited. I'm excited that you honored my invitation to be the first guest on this podcast, Granules of Grief with Refiloe. It was important for me to reach out to you and try to see if this is something you're interested in doing based on, I think, how I came to know you and some of what the things you do, which one of which is writing poetry and actually writing poetry books that I hope you'll touch on when you introduce yourself. And some of the poetry that you write that I really like. I felt like I was always holding on to the people that I have lost. And when I met some of your poetry, I realized that I felt that it is okay to hold on. It is okay to write about the people you've lost. It is okay to mourn through the writing. Even if years have passed, it's okay. And so thank you for all your patience in making this happen. Please let the listeners know who you are. I know very briefly that you are a language teacher, you are a father, and you are a loving husband to a very loving wife. That inside joke there, I won't tell that inside joke.
Thank you.
Do take it away.
I am grateful for the invitation, and I mean that seriously, because it is true that we go quite a ways back, but never really had the chance to sit and talk about things. So this is a happy moment for me, and I thank you for inviting me. And I'm also grateful that you like what I try to write, what I write. It's satisfying because I know that you're an artist as well, and so for somebody who also writes to another writer's stuff is satisfying.
Okay.
So I am married. I have 2 kids, and I live in France, in Paris. I'll start with the end. How did I get here? I got here from the United States, where I was studying biology and chemistry at a university in Tennessee. And I landed there from Kenya, Nairobi, where my family lived. And my family lived in Nairobi because we had run away from Lesotho after a certain infamous attack on our family on the 4th of September, 1981. Whose intention was to eliminate our father because he was quite critical of the then government of Lesotho. And so in 1981, in September, we left unceremoniously after having lost a 3-year-old boy, my nephew, and ended up in South Africa because when you're in Lesotho and you leave, you don't have a choice unless you have a private jet.
Yep.
And so we ended up in the Rand, which is now Gauteng, and had a taste of apartheid because we were picked up for past laws. We didn't have the right papers as Black people, and our passports didn't do anything to help us.
Yes.
And so it was a great relief that in the end, my parents were able to organize some kind of transit for the family from Johannesburg to Nairobi, where Dad had already found a job through his connections because he was a very heavily connected individual. And I think that's one of the reasons why the government of the day was afraid of whatever he said, because they knew that he was talking to quote unquote important people abroad.
Yes.
And so I write books. I didn't start off writing books. I started off writing really because we had read a lot in my family. My father was a journalist. My mom was a teacher. And so books were...
Great combo.
Yes. And books were galore everywhere. On every room you went to, there were books. And so we read a lot. We didn't have a television set. So we created our own worlds with the books that we were reading. And I just started writing when I was in high school. I started writing fiction.
I believe.
And a short anecdote out of that is that I once won a short story contest that the teacher had organized.
Yes.
And then he he announced me as the winner in front of the class, but then afterwards he asked me where I had copied the story from. And so that it didn't make up my mind to try poetry. It made up my mind to stop writing altogether.
Oh.
But then we had a new teacher, a lady, nice, red, luscious lips, great voice. And and she read poems to us, and I was hooked. All this in high school happened before 1981, before leaving the country. So after this attack happened and we lost 2 members of our family, I started writing about the events that had happened, and especially when I got to the United States, because that's where I ended up after Nairobi. And my sister and I were often alone in the summer when students were home because the school was closed during the summer. So we were often alone and moneyless and unhappy. And so the poems started coming out of that. And so I have at present written 4 personal volumes. And I say personal because I've also edited 3 anthologies now of poems. And the books are available in all the finest bookshops all over the planet. The first one was published in London. It's called Things That Are Silent. And the second one, Things That Are Silent. The second one is called Waslap, and it was published in Oxford, in England. The third one is called Letter to Country. It was published in Chicago, actually in Woodstock, which is a small town next to Chicago. And the fourth one is called Qoaling, also published in Oxford by the same publisher of Waslap. The names of the books, Things That Are Silent, the first book, the name just popped at me, sprang out at me from a poem in the book about Michael Jackson. And it sounded like a nice line for a title, Things That Are Silent.
Things That Are Silent, yeah. Love the title, actually. Really loved it.
And so it became the title of the book. The title Waslap, Waslap, which means washcloth.
It's borrowed from the Afrikaans language of South Africa.
Yes.
Washcloth, and Waslap
yes, exactly.
is the word for that, yes.
Exactly. The was, W-A-S, is like wash. So, and the lap, we do say le lap, it means cloth. And so we have borrowed it. And so the reason that this book is called Washcloth or Waslap is because when my father passed away later in life, I took his Waslap and brought it back to Paris with me and washed myself with it and got lots of poems out of doing that every morning. And one of the poems is called The Waslap of My Father, and it embodies the spirit of the book. And the third one, Letter to Country, there are many poems in the book that are directed at Basotho and indirectly at the Lesotho government. And so it's a letter to country. The cover there's a flag of Lesotho with a stamp on it and an envelope or something like that. And the last published book called Qoaling gets its name from the village where we lived when the attack took place.
Yes.
Just on the outskirts of Maseru to the south. And so it's called Qoaling. It has poems about my nephew and my brother Mbera, about my parents. So there seems to be a running theme throughout the poems I write. The other touch on family, the deceased, or on my parents and on politics. It's been hard for me to, how can I put it, to shirk this, to get away from it. But I don't want to. I feel comfortable writing this, and it's therapy for me. I have been talking to a few professors in some universities and sharing some of the new poems with them. And some of them are encouraging me to be more direct toward the government and address the government directly in my poems. And so I'm working on that. I find it a difficult exercise to do. And so that's who I am. I'm working on a 5th personal book, which is called Mbera, New and Collected Poems.
I'm looking forward to my listeners hearing more about Mbera, about Waslap, and about this journey that takes us from Qoaling to some US towns and Waslaps that travel from Maseru to Paris. It is a very beautiful story in terms of how you refuse to let your people die. And I wish that when I was starting out writing about my dad, I had this answer when a friend in Auckland Park one afternoon asked me as I read to her, and she said, "Why do you write of dead people?" I wish I'd had that answer to say, this is where I'm comfortable. I like what you said about I'm comfortable here. That's why I said to you, you gave me permission. And I'm now also able to say, I like to mourn my dead. I like to mourn them in all different ways, music, writing. And I think you captured that very beautifully. I can't wait for our listeners to hear more.
I think if I may just
Of course.
interject, I think that the fact that we're comfortable in these spaces that some other people may consider spaces of the dead is that when we are there, at least for me, and I imagine that it could be the same for you, when we are in those spaces, those people are not dead.
Exactly.
And we talk to them, they talk to us. And it's comforting, it's healthy.
Yes.
So I'm not about to stop going there.
That is a quote for me. When we are in those spaces where we commemorate our dead, those people are not dead. I really like that, and I'm taking that away with me. You mentioned a lot of important things about your dad and state and how this really is a central part of all the painful stories that we're going to discuss today. So I just want to go back and say, elaborate a bit on what you would have considered in all this to be your most significant encounter with grief.
We have all been confronted with this. Just this summer, we were in the south of France staying with some friends. And while we were having an aperitif, the phone rang and our friend's mother had just passed away. And they announced it to him. He was saddened by this news, but the news was expected. And the mom was 99 years old. And so he was sad but relieved. And so some of us experience grief in this way. It's natural, but some of us experience it in a different way. It's not natural in the sense that either the person who passes away is way too young or their life has been extinguished before its time. And it seems that in my case, my nephew at 3 years old was way too young to die with a bullet in his head. My brother, who was between 17 and 18, was also killed by the army. We think that it was the army of Lesotho with some other members of the ruling party who had organized this. And then a third person who was destined to die was Dad on the day that they attacked our home. And it was not to be. He got out the kitchen window and fled in the night in his pajamas. 3 days later, the same people went to Murija, which is a small town, I think about 50 kilometers from the capital, to the home of, because he was on the list as well. He was third on the list of the bad people. And so they found him and they took him away and they killed him with two of his friends in the town of Siloe in is it Mafeteng or Mohalesuku? I think Mohalesuku. And so the rest of the other people who were on the list just took off, I think. They took off. They took off.
Great. It's a relief to hear that actually, no, they were able to get away.
They left, yes, because the first person that they, Odilon Siheri, was killed. Dad was supposed to be number 2 and he escaped, but number 3 was killed as well. So everybody saw that it wasn't a joke.
It wasn't a joke.
It was really serious. And these deaths that happened when I was about between 18 and 19, actually between 19 and 20 years old, the most painful, they were painful, of course, but in different ways. His bedclothes were soaked in bodily juices, in blood and brain matter and things like that. And so that's how my nephew, Motlatsi, died.
I always talk about moments because there's a moment when you become a person whose nephew has passed.
Yeah.
I almost see it as a direct line. It's a breaking. Something breaks and you're no longer the person you were, and then nothing is ever the same. It's a very distinct moment, and I want to try and touch on that.
Yes. When the attack took place, my younger sister and I were at the university in Roma, the National University of Lesotho. I'm pretty sure the attack took place on a Saturday. It was the 4th of September, but I think pretty sure it was a Saturday because for absolutely no reason at all, perhaps to see my nephew because we really got along, got on a taxi and went home. In the morning after the attack. And the taxi from the National University of Lesotho dropped me off in town, Kingsway, next to the traffic. And I had a cousin who worked at the butcher shop there. And he saw me and he rushed over. Kingsway, yes. There was a butchery there. He saw me and rushed over and said, "What happened? What happened? I've been hearing things." And I had no idea what he was talking about. I was by myself, but on the way home from the university, so the neighbor's car, one of our neighbor's cars, go in the opposite direction. It was to go and pick us up. So yeah, but he came back with my sister, and so I got on another taxi and went home. And it was already the people were already milling about. There were already a lot of people, and so I discovered that Motlatsi was dead, and that we don't know where Dad was. Because he had just gone out the window, we had no idea. Even if we thought that they had taken him, and if they had, then he was dead. But in fact, he had gotten out and got help. Somebody drove him to one of his cousins who lived in Qoaling, somewhere there. I think he stayed there. I don't know for how long, and then he was driven to the river to cross into South Africa. I think that I can very easily label Motlatsi passing that way the most difficult death I've ever had to deal with, because I felt so many different emotions. He was a bubbly young boy who, whenever I came home, he would run to the gate and he called me Antabi.
Oh.
Because that would be Abuti Rethabile became Antabi. I wasn't even his Abuti, I was his uncle. And so that was a heart-hitting thing, and it was immediate. That day that he died, I was bawling. I was screaming. In about a week after that, there was the funeral, and his mother was beside herself with grief, which was quite understandable. And we cried with her. There was absolutely no shame in letting it all hang out, quote unquote. And adults and men and women were all letting it all hang out, because it was an incredible funeral of a 3-year-old boy with thousands of people. There were so many people, and it was political. It was a political funeral.
Imagine. The death was very political.
He died instead of someone else. And so it hit me directly between the eyes.
I think you mentioned in his poem, the men who came. And as you talk, I'm thinking about how the men who came didn't care, really. They had a target. And that line stayed with me. The men who came that night, I think it says, the bullet that found the softness of his life, or something. It's occurring to me now that it really was not important to the men who came that a 3-year-old might be in that bed of that man that they hunted so much.
Yes, because the little boy slept with his grandparents. Otherwise, he would fall asleep with difficulty if he wasn't with them.
Which is not an uncommon thing at home in Lesotho. My kids find a lot of pleasure in sleeping with their grandparents. And the horror of it is, I can't imagine the full horror.
This line that you mentioned in the poem that I wrote from The Men Who Came, with hindsight, I saw that. Because when I was writing, I'm not thinking about, I'm changing words, I'm moving words, removing commas, but they were faceless. They were the men who came. It didn't really matter who they were, because they were sent there by someone.
Exactly.
So it was just the men who came, who did not have any faces or names.
Yes. I just think that that's so fitting, that they should just be the men who came, because they're just tools.
Yes. So the pain from that was immediate. And even when we left the country following his funeral, I cannot remember whether we left 2 weeks later or 3 weeks or a month after his funeral. But his memory was with us, and we were still, what's the word? On beat. I would say we were like wet dogs.
In a haze, in some sort of a daze. I can imagine.
In a daze, yes.
The utter haze that I have experienced in pre-burial and post-burial. And I can imagine that collective zombie-like experience for all of you.
Yeah, actually for all of us, I would think, yes.
Exactly.
The death of my older brother, our older brother, whose name was Khotsofalang, a very ironic name, considering how he left.
Eventually.
Yes. Telling us to be satisfied. But the realization of his untimely departure was gradual.
Mm.
It crept up on me. When we left Lesotho, we did not know that he had been killed already because he had left home in 1981. That would have been about 2 years earlier.
Mm-hmm. So we're tracking
September of
back a
that
bit
year.
to a period before the attack, a period where I think either Motlatsi would have been born the same year or was around, was about to be born, but we're going back to before the attack so we can understand.
I think it's 3 years because I don't think Khotsofalang knew Motlatsi. And when Motlatsi died, he was 3 years old. Then my brother Khotsofalang and his friends went to Botswana, in a nutshell, get training to come and change the situation within the country.
Yes.
Because we were not having elections and the government in power was only giving jobs to people of its own party. When I left Lesotho, I found it strange that in Lesotho, when a party succeeds or gets into power, the government is made up mostly of people who come from that party.
Yep.
I found that in the States it wasn't the case. In France, it's not the case. Whether you're a socialist and for this, I blame the fact that our parties have uniforms and have songs and have my picture. So everybody knows how the neighbor votes. Very easy to keep somebody out of the government. If you are already in the government and they are in the opposition and they want to get into the government, but you say, I don't know, don't give that guy. That was a bit strange. And so when Khotsofalang left, he mentioned it to me that he was leaving. He mentioned it the night before he left. And I understood that he's leaving with a group of his friends and that they are going to seek help to train them. We were both in high school. Yes, Becker High School, highly politicized and politically charged and so on. But the night before he told me that he was leaving, and he explained very briefly what it was all about. And I said I'm coming with you. And I saw the look on his face. He didn't wag his finger at me, but the look on his face wagged its finger at
It
me.
was enough.
And he stopped me in my tracks and told me, no, you're not.
You're doing no such thing.
You're doing no such thing. Imagine if we both didn't come back, how mom would take that. That's what he said.
That that he had a concept of him not coming back.
He had thought it through, I think.
Exactly. Paints him to me, yes, of course, one as someone who knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
But also really, it makes me think, I don't know, more highly of him because I know that it wouldn't be me, definitely, going anywhere. You know what I mean? At 17, it wouldn't be me. It wouldn't be any of my friends.
That's really young.
Exactly.
That's really young when I look at my son who is
Yes.
24 and I imagine that my brother was 17 when he did this.
I wanted to stop and just acknowledge that in case I didn't get to it stop and acknowledge that about Khotsofalang and remind people that most of us at 17 were just concerned with where the party is at. And I would never have sacrificed even a pair of shoes for the country. And he sacrificed his life. And I don't want the episode to end without me saying that, honestly.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Him and some of his friends who lost their lives as well, yeah. And so his nickname was Mbera. And very briefly, why did we call him Mbera? He got this in primary school because in primary school, Dad was in prison. My father was taken into custody in 1970. In January of that year, when the incumbent government realized that they had lost the election to the BCP. And so they sent the PMU, the Police Mobile Unit, to pick up all the leaders of the BCP and the staunchest supporters of the BCP, which at that time was the Basotho Land Congress Party. And so Dad went to prison for 18 months, and suddenly we didn't have a source of income. We had to move from our house in Mushasha 2 and move to Lekweishining, which is another suburb of Maseru, where it was more affordable. I think we had a two-roomed apartment. It was mom with 5 kids. And so my brother, Khotsofalang, our brother really was unsatisfied with this kind of thing. And he would ask Mom, why don't you make scones anymore? Just out of the blue. Mom would painstakingly explain to him that we don't have the same means. And he had gotten used to a specific lifestyle and he would have liked to have kept it. I remember that from Lekweishining, we moved to Qoaling because Mom opened a convenience store, what in Lesotho we call the cafe, KFE. And so she opened that, and we moved closer to it in order to be able to run it, basically. Qoaling, there where we lived, there's a mountain, and so he would point at the mountain and say, because they were constructing the Hilton Hotel was being talked about, that it was going to be built on the top of that mountain.
Uh-huh.
And so he was saying, I'm going to go to school in the States, and when I come back, I'll stay in that hotel.
Oh.
And I'll be able to see you feeding the dogs down there.
I wish everyone understood the connotations of the
Yep.
task of feeding the dogs is in our context. Just feeding Ninja outside while he's up there.
Yeah, in Sesotho, as he said, it's more telling in Sesotho.
It really is. It would have been hilarious, really.
Yes. So he was a guy who wanted to live a certain way. He would have succeeded, I am sure, because he was great with numbers, physics, but he decided otherwise.
We can't deny he had the drive also.
The drive, yeah.
Yes.
He was very quiet, except when he was making fun of us, his younger siblings. But with his friends, he was quiet. He was very good at murabaraba, which is the same game as a board game called Shax that they play in Somalia. It's exactly the same. SHAX.
Thanks for that, because my brain was like,
Murabaraba, yes.
I know murabaraba, but then I was trying to
imagine what it is. Murabaraba. Some people call it the Basutu chess. I don't particularly like that. It may give your listeners an idea of what it is. Yes. And so we talk through the game. We make fun of our opponent when we're playing Murabaraba. Because what happens is that you want your opponent to move their pieces in a specific way so that you can remove them, just like in chess. And so he would, after he had made a specific move and you had no choice but to move in a specific way, be taunting you. He would be taunting you. Sunanguina. And then he would say, Imami nantate.
I must say, I'm loving this painting that you're doing of his essence. I really am enjoying that, experiencing him as a secondhand version of how you would have experienced him. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. Why did we call him Mbera? There were these they're not receipts, but they're booklets that look like checkbooks, and Mom was using them for invoices, for example. And so she would write in them, and they had carbon paper, to make several copies. And so my brother took one of those, and in the amount section, he wrote 100,000 rands or something like that.
Which was a lot of money.
A lot of money, and he addressed it himself. And he signed it, so he put it in his pocket and took it to school, and he would show it around to his friends. And the signature that he had put on this was, I don't remember the first name, but it was like John Mbera. Some invented name.
Okay.
So he would tell his friends that, I have an uncle in South Africa. His name is Malume Mbera, and money and so on. And so when they found out that it was all a lie, Mbera became his nickname. But
it was also, I see it as a coping mechanism, this world he created in his head.
Exactly,
to cope with the current reality.
It was a kind of shield for himself. Same way I think that poetry was for me. Yes. Then we lost him, and we didn't even know until we were outside the country ourselves as refugees. And in a way, before leaving Lesotho, a few months before leaving Lesotho, I was at the National University of Lesotho, a soccer player. And we went to Botswana to play against the university there. I met, and I'm not going to name them, but I met 2 or 3 of the friends that he had left with. And they didn't say anything to me about him. I must say that I didn't ask. But I'm imagining that he was probably already late and they didn't know how to tell me that your brother died. Yeah.
Yeah. You haven't seen your brother in a while, not to say anything, and for them not to say anything, and for you to miss in that moment the significance of them not saying anything.
Yeah.
Some people have said that the subconscious sometimes tells you things that you can't face, and therefore you choose to exist in that unknowing space.
No, I agree. I think it's a kind of protection against what might have been if they had told me he was dead in Botswana. I don't know what I would have done. So far away from home.
Yes.
But then I came back home and my parents said, "Did you see anybody?" Yes, I saw this. And did they say anything? No, they didn't say anything. And that was it.
And that was it. How many years was this that you went to Botswana after he had left you with that message that, hey, I'm going?
You mean between the time he left home and the time I went to Botswana? It was about 2 years, possibly a little more than that. But it was about 2 years. We hadn't forgotten him, but in our minds, he was alive. Remember, he did not tell anyone else in the family. And the next morning, when he was not there for breakfast, I don't remember if it was mom or dad who asked, "Where is he?" I said, "I don't know." I don't know. It was easy for him to slip out because when we lived in Qoaling, there was a house. Let's call it the main house, and then there was a rendezvous at a distance, and that rendezvous or that hut was the boy's bedroom. And so it was very easy for him to, at 5 a.m., to get out and go. Yeah. I didn't even see him leave.
You just also gave me a very clear picture of the gap between the life I assume we would have had before the government decided to come for your dad. I didn't get it before, but I'm getting it now, how dissatisfied he would have been with that life.
He liked the good things, nice clothes. And there was a point, basically, where mom couldn't afford to get us toothbrushes, and he made one for himself. He made one with his hands, and he brushed his teeth with it.
Wow. I believe you when you say that he would have been something great.
Would have been, yeah.
Exactly.
I'm quite convinced. He did not, he was very loyal to his friends, and so he didn't want us to mix with his friends.
Yeah.
And just a very quick anecdote. So we went to Peka High School in the Leribe district, and very rowdy school. We beat up the other kids from other schools when we lost the football match.
Wow.
We beat up the teachers. We had strikes at the school. The police station was a stone's throw from our school. And one day we lost to that high school in TY. What was it called? Anyway, this high school in TY. We lost 12-0. In football, that's a big gap. I was playing for the B team.
Okay.
But the other school had the national team of Lesotho. From goalkeeper to attacker. It was the national team. It was Roni Malefetse, the goalkeeper. It was Muchini Matiti, Bomba Matiti. So our school didn't stand a chance. And so after we had lost, the match was finished. It was played in TY, Tiatianing. We made to go and beat them up. They were on the other side of the pitch and we were on this side. And our teachers stopped us. So the next morning we beat up the teachers. And the police came, of course, they were not far. And they started hurling and throwing tear gas canisters at us. I and my friends were on the top of this small building. It was an outhouse toilet. And one of the canisters fell on the roof. And we all made a rush to jump off the roof. And I heard Khotsofalang call my name, Rethabile. I didn't even know he was watching me. I thought he didn't care for me. But at a moment of danger, he was watching me. So I guess he was watching all the time, but he didn't want me to know.
Yeah, I don't want you to know, didn't want to associate with you. I think a lot of people who have older siblings will know that there's the deep sibling love that nothing can tamper with, that shows itself, especially in moments when the sibling is in danger. But other than that, if you're not in danger, keep your distance.
Keep your
friends
distance
come first.
Exactly. Stay away from me. And so the death of my brother was gradual, which is what I've been trying to show, that it took his departure and the discovery when we were already in exile that he was dead. And if I remember, we were in Kenya at the time that we discovered that he was dead.
Because just so that our listeners are following, you left Lesotho a couple of weeks in the days we talked about. You left through South Africa. Your dad,
Yes,
thanks to his connections, was able to make a way for you as a family to Nairobi.
to
But
Nairobi, yes.
you and one of your sisters came to the US for your education. And so the rest of the family would have been in Nairobi when this letter came. And
That's right. I don't remember if it was a letter or a phone call, because I tend to cry a lot on the phone, so it must have been a letter. I probably got that. And so when we left Lesotho, I was in my second year. I was a sophomore at the National University of Lesotho. So was my sister. And we had to start from scratch when we got to the US, because we didn't have nothing, no certificates, no GPA from the National University of Lesotho. And so we started from first year at the university. And
I just want to register this. Everyone who has been a teenager or learning new things, along comes this whirlwind of death and departures, and you leave suddenly with nothing. As though, I think you mentioned to me in our side correspondence that you left as though you were going shopping. I want to bring our listeners with me in my own envisioning of this.
I think you're right to do that, yes. That's how it happened, yes. Because we knew that if we took even the smallest briefcase, would draw suspicion, because we were suspicious that the family was being watched.
Yes.
In case dad came back, because remember, he had escaped and they didn't know where he was. We thought that our house was being watched.
Yes.
We thought that they had planted, what do you call these, mics in our car, because they took the car away the morning of the attack. The police did. But afterwards, when we were thinking, why did they do that? We couldn't find a good enough reason for them to have done that.
Yeah.
And so there were all these complications to think about.
Even as you were going through it, I think it was survival mode, I would imagine. And so never really getting a chance to process the trauma. And that's why we're so thankful that you're a writer, because you get to process it over and over and over again.
True.
You've brought up many important things. You talked about the nature of your nephew and your brother's death. You've talked about how harrowing it is when this person is young and when this person dies in a way. And I wanted to ask you about the idea of justice. We talked about the men, we talked about the government. I wanted to know, because of the nature of their deaths, how this has played out in terms of your grief journey.
I still want to talk to one of those men, one of those faceless people who showed up. Why? Because the first thing is to forgive them, but to find a semblance of an answer to the question, why? I know why it was to kill dad, of course, but did they pay you? How would you accept? Did they give you some money or a promotion? Why? Unfortunately, in Lesotho, nobody will talk. I'm sure that there are people who are still alive who know who did that.
Yes.
But they will not talk. And in South Africa, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And I think that helped a lot of people get over their losses, because they faced the tormentors of their loved ones and the killers of their loved ones. And I think that it would be awesome if I could sit across the table from somebody who killed my nephew and or my brother, shake their hand, talk to them, tell them I'm not bitter, because I don't know if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't have done the same thing. I don't know their situation when they accepted to go to Qoaling at 4 a.m. and do the deed. And I think I've written in some articles the same things, to the effect that, hey, you're forgiven.
Yes.
But just tell me what happened. How did it go? And this is, I don't even want them to be judged. It's too late for that.
Yes.
I just want to take the weight off their, I was going to say shoulders, no, chest, lighten their load, and for them to know that, hey, I'm here, but I don't hate you. Because if you could make me hate you, then it would mean that you own me. But no, you don't. You don't own me. And so for me, justice would be if it all came to light and
Yes.
everybody forgave each other, because there's still things going on underground, in the undergrowth, there are still things that are hidden, and there are still animosities between families. Or I sometimes hear people on Facebook, for example, say that it's all lies. That it's all lies that there was an attack on my family, because actually it's a hoax, or I don't know.
We do have the very real death of a 3-year-old boy.
Yeah. No, we know what it was, because there was harassment before this.
Yes.
Meaning,
Yes.
we're going to kill you. There was that kind of harassment with letters in the post. And when they left, they hadn't taken anything except lives.
Exactly. So social media it's a full, but in a lot of ways, there's always people hiding behind it just to be cruel.
Yes, there are a lot of
Absolutely.
cruel people. There are a lot of
no
cruel
reason.
people, yeah.
I really appreciate your mention of the TRC. I believe that the TRC was important. I'm
So do I.
astonished at the empathy that you are showing. I have no words, honestly. Well, I really don't. I just wanted to acknowledge
I think there is no other way of moving forward than to approach it that way. I have never forgiven Ndadele Jonathan, but I think he's about the only person that I have not forgiven, because he did it out of spite, whereas the Lekis that he sent probably did it out of something else, promotion, money, or I don't know, or because they were obeying a higher power. But the gentleman who was at the top, he passed away, of course, while we were refugees. And I was sad, because he'll never say, why in 1970 did you refuse to step down when you had lost the election? We'll never get an answer to that.
Exactly. Even some of the things that happen today, because history repeats itself in many ways. For me, the question is always, was it even worth it for just that little taste of God knows what power? But
I have the answer to that, and it's no, it wasn't worth it. No,
it really wasn't.
Yeah.
And still, for me, your empathy is astonishing. To know and to be able to exercise and to live in empathy are two different things. And I think you freed yourself. I think it's a very beautiful thing and a very powerful thing that a lot of people could maybe try to learn from. I'm not going to say that people who hold on are wrong, or that people who hold on are wrong. I'm happy for you, for your strength, because that's strength, that you have that strength. But everybody is different. Yeah.
Everybody's different. But I think that for all of us, if we live with this desire for revenge, it doesn't serve our own purpose. But what I want to say is that I'm holding on to the memories of the people I loved who were killed. I'm not letting that go. What I'm letting go is the spirit of wanting to revenge and see people who caused me this misery suffer. I don't want that anymore. I want to move forward. I want to move on, and I'll just put it down on paper. Whatever it is that is bugging me about the deaths in my family, I'll put it down on paper and stand up from the desk afterward or computer feeling happy.
Yep. Thank you for spending time on this episode of Granules of Grief with Refiloe. I do hope that you got even just a granule of what you need. You can find more information on my social media profiles on Instagram at Refiloe and Refiloe on my Facebook page, as outlined in the description box. I hope to see you there too.